Thank you very much for welcoming me here this afternoon. I'm Emma Howard-Boyd and I chair the Environment Agency in the UK, which is the environmental regulator, as well as having responsibility for flood and risk management here in England. And I'd like to start off by thanking SRI Services and Partners for inviting me to speak today as part of Good Money Week. I don't know what the afternoon has been like in terms of discussions. I had my own board meeting today, so I've literally just arrived hot off the back of several hours of board meeting. But Good Money Week comes nearly exactly a year after the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its landmark report on climate change. That report said we have 12 years to hold global heating to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. And even if we manage to do that, storms, sea level rises, heat waves and droughts are still going to get worse because of the climate change that is already locked into the Earth's system. Since then, the UN has estimated that climate disasters are happening at the rate of 1 per week. The implications for finance are huge. Global economic losses from disasters are already estimated at $520 billion per year. This is surely one of the reasons why the Financial Times is currently calling for a reset of capitalism. The editor Lionel Barber recently wrote to subscribers saying, "The long-term health of free enterprise capitalism will depend on delivering profit with purpose. Companies will come to understand that this combination serves their self-interest as well as their customers and employees. Without change, the prescription risks being far more painful." And those prescriptions are already being discussed. The UK government has agreed to reach net zero emissions by 2050, and the Labour Party has voted to look at whether it is possible to change that to 2030. Neither timeline will be easy. There will be some sectors that can reach net zero by 2030 and some that will struggle to get there by 2050. But it's not in anyone's interests to wait for a date to be set in law. As financial professionals, you need to be ahead of these changes from a political point of view, but perhaps more importantly, because the climate emergency will impact supply chains and assets, infrastructure, and more. And you will need all of your investments or your clients' investments to be resilient, whether they are classed as green, good, sustainable, or ethical. Or perhaps you will be left behind. At this point in the day, you're probably wondering what or who is this person lecturing us about the end of the world? As well as being chair of the Environment Agency, I have spent over 25 years of my career working in finance. And that combination, the combination of those two things is why I was asked to be the UK Commissioner to the Global Commission on Adaptation. And last month, the GCA released a report, Adapt Now, a global call for leadership on climate resilience. I've got a copy on that chair over there. It suggests that investing in $1.9 trillion in adaptation efforts globally from 2020 to 2030 could guarantee $7 trillion in total net benefits. However, without action, millions of people around the world will be pushed further into poverty, conflict, and instability. And if 1.9 trillion sounds like a lot, consider that over $90 trillion is expected to be invested globally in infrastructure by 2040, especially in developing countries. These investments must be made resilient to meet the challenges of rapid urbanization, increasing disaster risks, and a changing climate. Get this right, and climate adaptation can deliver a triple dividend by avoiding future losses, generating positive economic gains through innovation, and delivering social and environmental benefits. So my message tonight is not that we are doomed. It is that there are huge opportunities in the low carbon transition, but we all need to move fast. In the recent Green Finance Strategy, the government has increased the expectation for financial institutions and regulators, including pension funds, to consider the impact of climate change within their investments. In Aviva's Climate-Related Financial Disclosure 2018, their analysis showed that their investments are on track with holding global warming to a 3.4 degree rise. By any scientific reckoning, that is a terrifying temperature rise. But Aviva point out they are ahead. Just the FTSE 100 index is headed towards 3.9 degrees. But Aviva's disclosure is a step in the right direction. Disclosures like these move us away from a culture in which businesses don't talk about climate threats for fear of legal action. They move us towards a financial system that, recognising it too has a leadership role to play in the climate emergency. This is now a race. It was recently reported that many big Japanese companies, including Mazda Motor, Nomura and Sony, have complied with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures at a faster rate than their European and US rivals. In a speech in Tokyo last night, the Governor of the Bank of England said, "Once again, Japan is leading the way." GPIF, the world's largest pension fund, calculates that its portfolio is aligned to a 3.5 degree world. He went on, "With our citizens, led by the young, demanding climate action, it is becoming essential for asset owners to disclose the extent to which their clients' money is being invested in line with their values." A news story from earlier this year illustrates this perfectly. Bristol Airport plans to expand its passenger count to 20 million by the mid-2040s. It's submitted planning permission for a larger terminal, a bus and coach station, and a bigger car park. Students from local schools, the Churchill Academy and Chew Valley School, protest that this is a threat to their future and it will contribute to the climate crisis. The North Somerset Times reported that one of the students, 17-year-old Scarlett Vester, decided to become involved with the campaign because she was distressed by the concept of increased air travel and car use and the disastrous consequences the expansion could have on the environment. But what is interesting about the students' campaign is that they followed the money. The airport is owned by the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, so the students have sent a video to teachers in Canada asking if they really know how their retirement savings are being invested. It's a brilliant video on YouTube, really worth looking at. We'll see what happens with that, but this small action shows how important financial disclosure is becoming in people's everyday lives. Young people investing in a pension now don't want this to be a catch-22 situation. Their savings needn't contribute to a world less hospitable by the time they retire. In business, you need good information to succeed, and this is what the Environment Agency Pension Fund and the Church of England national investing bodies had in mind when we set up the Transition Pathway Initiative. After just 2.5 years, it's been supported by investors representing 14 trillion combined assets under management and advice. Not everything we find out, though, is good news. The TPI's State of the Transition report, which was released in July, looked at 274 of the world's highest emitting publicly listed companies. It says 46% of the companies are failing to adequately integrate climate change into their business decisions. Only 12.5% of the companies are reducing carbon emissions at the rate required to keep global warming below 2 degrees, and a quarter do not report their own emissions at all, undermining a key recommendation of the Task Force for Climate-Related Disclosure. But the report also notes that 1 in 4 companies assessed for a second year are improving on climate management. At the recent UN Climate Summit, there were a number of announcements that also provide reasons to be optimistic. The European Bank of Research and Development launched a first ever dedicated climate resilience bond worth $700 million. I was also involved in the setting up of the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment, a finance sector-led initiative that brings together organisations from across the investment value chain to integrate climate risks into decision-making and drive a shift towards a more climate-resilient economy for all countries, including the most vulnerable. But by providing a methodology to quantify the economic and financial benefits of adaptation, the Coalition aims to provide a substantial incentive for financial markets to embed resilience up front. The Coalition is supported by the UK government, which made a string of relevant announcements at the UN. For example, in the next 5 years, the UK will double its contribution to international climate finance to £11.6 billion. And this will contribute to a raft of different initiatives across government and overseas. Next year, the UK presidency of the COP, in partnership with Italy, will present the private sector with many opportunities to showcase good work on the international stage. If we can demonstrate genuine leadership. So to conclude, there's a lot to be optimistic about, provided we are first realistic and honest about the risks of the climate emergency. Good Money Week is a good time to be discussing how to do this, and I look forward to doing just that with all of you in a few moments, because I'm assuming we've got some time for questions. Thank you very much. So, how do you want to do this?
I'm very happy for you to just stay at the front and take questions. You've got a mic if you're there, but I'll come across so I can call out names and whoever's asking the question.
Thank you, Julia.
So you're not going to get the opportunity to talk to Emma every day, I would say. So can I please invite you all to fire your questions at Emma? Let's start with Jill at the front.
Yeah, hi Emma, thanks for coming today. There's a lot of talk about low carbon, carbon zero, but from your perspective, working for the Environment Agency, what's happening? What are you doing to help farmers and animal agriculture to have less impact on the environment, which in turn will reduce global warming as well?
A great question, and actually the leadership is coming from organisations like the National Farmers Union, who themselves have announced a commitment to net zero by 2040. We have a role that touches on the work of farmers in many, many different ways, not least because sometimes their land is flooded and their land can help provide resilience for communities up and down the country, because it can hold water as a reservoir, as a storage area upstream but above towns. One of the opportunities that comes out of the UK, potentially or set to leave the European Union, is the reform of CAP. And within that, the government, the Department of Environment, is looking at many, many different ways to capture public money, so the money that is given to the farming sector, and how it then links to public good, with a strong focus on environmental performance and improvement. Our interface with the farming community is, through water, too much, too little, river quality. So again, one of the impacts of using different types of fertilizers is diffuse water pollution that ends up in the rivers. It's, that could be an entire conference, an entire day, and I think over the next few months and next year, we'll be working alongside the NFU to help them deliver on their commitment to net zero.
Next question, so at the back, Daniel.
Thank you very much for your talk earlier on. I'm slightly puzzled. When I look at, Mark Carney, he really talks about, the climate urgency. When we look at science, I think 98% of scientists know, that the climate change is due to made emissions. How could it be that the government in general seems so far behind in terms of actually acting upon this climate emergency?
Well, I chair an arm's length body that is part of the public sector, and we have a range of different, so I'm not here to speak on behalf of government. I think what I am prepared to say, though, is that through the climate strikes, through the what's going on in our city right now, green issues, climate change issues have gone up the political agenda in a way that I have never seen in my career, having worked in and around the environmental movement for 30 years plus. I think the fact that the UK government committed to net zero came about partly because of the youth movement, partly because academics, businesses, investors all called for urgent action. I was part of an initiative, I can't spit out my words this evening, that pulled together over 130 signatures from the business and investment community just before our former Prime Minister stepped down, which gave her and her team some of the encouragement to make that final decision and commitment to head towards net zero. I think we all have a role to play in sending massive signals to our government in terms of the urgency, which is why I highlighted that this is now being debated amongst the different parties. As a public servant, I serve whichever government is in government, whichever party is in government, and the fact that we've got a debate now between 2050 versus 2030, I think shows where we have come from politics. I think it's the onus lies on everybody in this room, whether you're an individual, an investor, a consumer, a business, to make sure that we don't lose this moment of driving through those commitments. But if you look where the UK is, we were the first country to have a Climate Change Act. We will be hosting COP26, so the global climate change discussions in December next year. There is a huge opportunity for this country to show global leadership, but global leadership at the urgency that is now needed. Because again, I would say that our government over the last 20 years, and there have been different governments, has been leading on this agenda. But what we know is that nowhere has been leading at the speed at which we now need to be acting.
Hi, Brian McGee. I'm travelled all the way from Northern Ireland, so we're still part of the UK at the minute. We have a lot of things going on in Belfast and Northern Ireland at the minute, not least of a lot of unemployment. We have a very big, like the last questioner said, that we're a big dairy and agricultural system. We are looking at food waste. We've banned food waste going to landfill, have done so for a year and a half. Unfortunately, where do you take it now? England hasn't done that yet, and I'm wondering why is it not done it yet? And is that another area where we could fast track things from a climate perspective and get it drilled down into not big anaerobic digestion, but local economy anaerobic digestion where the whole community can get buy-in?
So I'm just trying to get my tight. It's been a very busy couple of years. The UK government launched the 25-year environment plan, which highlighted a number of different areas to focus on over the next 25 years. This was not about kicking things out 25 years, but setting out a long-term vision for the environment. Within that, and we have an environment bill which is due to be published soon, within that, waste and resource as a strategy was highlighted. So a lot of work has gone into looking at waste in its entirety and a move towards a circular economy. So it's not just food waste, it's everything from plastics. A lot of that early thinking has been done, has been published as a strategy, has been consulted on. We're now waiting for the next elements of regulatory steps forward. And we know that we're working in a fairly complex political environment at the moment, so I'm not in a position to say any more. But all of these things are looked at in a very, very different way as to how do we cut back on waste strands, how do we turn that into a circular economy. And I am very hopeful that when we move to that next phase, it will be a very exciting economic opportunity as well, and that we'll continue to see jobs created in the broader green and environmental agenda. Certainly any young person I'm talking today, whatever aspect of a career that they're looking at, I'm encouraging them to think of it through the lens of climate change. It doesn't matter whether you're in finance or in farming, these are going to be the issues that we have got to fundamentally come to terms with and work in a completely different and joining the dots up way.
Any more questions? Chris, please.
Emma, thank you very much. It's a really interesting presentation, and I want to ask you a question about what you said about the link up with the NFU over the next few years. As a firm, we've become interested in regenerative agriculture and the regeneration of land to create carbon sinks as a potential solution to climate heating. Is that something that you're going to be talking to the NFU about? Because we know from our discussions with farmers in our community that there is a lot of resistance to changing their techniques, their farming techniques, specifically ploughing. And we know all this is tied up with runoff, so, you know, the erosion of topsoil. Are these familiar terms to you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I probably won't be holding all of those discussions myself, but I know that teams, not just in the Environment Agency, but another part of the DEFRA group, Natural England, as well as DEFRA, are really keen to have these discussions. We need to almost reinvent the way we are doing all of our businesses through this lens of the climate emergency. It's not just about emissions reduction, it is also hugely important that we are looking at resilience to too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry, and fire, all of which are happening in this country, and I have had to work with our teams who've been in incident mode on all of those issues over the last couple of years. And quickly flip-flopping from, particularly on the water side, too much to too little. And that requires a very, very different way of thinking, working together in partnership, breaking down the silos. So in our board discussion today, we were looking at even the way we're organised, and I think we have quite a good understanding of all the interconnectedness, but whether we need to think over the next, I'm calling 2020 to 2030 the climate decade, how we organise ourselves, and it doesn't just stop at the environmental regulator, it has to flow through to all parts of the economy, how we reorganise our thinking and understand those join-ups. So yes, I think this, we have to be optimistic. I think I can get, in some moments, quite concerned and overwhelmed by the scale of the challenge we are now facing. But at moments like that, I look at the roles I have in different parts of government and the private sector, and I then start thinking about what are the things that I can do to start influencing that join-up. But I can only encourage everybody in this room to think about their role in those connections to other parts of the economy.
And can we have one final question at the back there? So one last question. Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose not ideal, the last question, bearing in mind it's to actually do with my locality. I actually live on chalk upland. I live in southeast Kent, Manston Airport, which is above a aquifer, where the Brexit pressure means that if we exit, the whole of the airport has actually been designated for parking lorries on directly on top of the water aquifer, which does suggests to me there's the direction might be, or priorities might be inappropriate, in that the water is probably more important about where the lorries, which we don't know what's actually going to be contained in them, is going to be parked regularly. I don't know what the question was really, but there we go.
Well,
Thank you, Phil.
Can I just assure you that I have personally visited Manston Airport. I did this before the previous deadline. The Environment Agency has been working very closely with and I can't remember, it's partly Department of Transport and partly Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, but we've been working very closely with them in preparation for that potential eventuality, precisely because of the aquifer, and worked at pace to make sure that if that area is used as a lorry park for a period of time, that it is safe and there is a specifically bunded area for hazardous materials which are transported from the UK to Europe. Again, that shows what you can do when you're working together and across departments on environmental issues.
Right, I said that was the final question. I think that's it. So if we could all thank Emma again, please.